Welcome everyone to part 10 of my Wrestlemania MVP LVP series, where I take a look at every Wrestlemania event throughout history and determine who is the most valuable player and who is the least valuable player from each event. Before I get into the Wrestlemanias I'm going to cover in this video, it was brought to my attention that it completely slipped my mind. I forgot to include a least valuable player for Wrestlemania 5. I guess I was just too busy marking out over Macho Man that it just completely slipped my mind to mention a least valuable player for that event. So I'll just go ahead and do that here. For Wrestlemania 5, the least valuable player is the Brooklyn Brawler, who somehow got a spot onto WrestleMania as the corner man to Bobby the Brain Heenan during his match with the Red Rooster. Oh my god, the Red Rooster has a WrestleMania match under his belt too. It's kind of weird, but yeah, like the presence of those two against a star like Bobby Heenan is really bizarre to see. You know, it's really, really strange. And there were a few other ones I could have picked, like the Bushwhackers didn't have a very good performance, and Run DMC had this random WrestleMania rap right in the middle of the show that wasn't very good, but no, I think I'm just going to give it to the Brooklyn Brawler, because it's just astonishing to me that he got a spot at a WrestleMania card, even if it wasn't a non-wrestling capacity. And yeah, so let's go into the 3 WrestleManias that we will be covering today. Those include WrestleManias 15, 19, and 24. So three interesting ones today. WrestleMania 15 might be the ultimate example of a WrestleMania that just completely rode the wave of success that the WWE was on at the time. The show was not very good. It was a horribly written and booked show, but nobody seemed to care at the time, because WrestleMania or WWE was so hot back then that nobody cared. Like, literally nobody gave a shit that they put on a half-ass show. WrestleMania 2000 was kind of the same way, where it was just the product was so hot that nobody gave a shit that the show sucked. And to be perfectly honest, WCW got away with that with a lot of their pay-per-views during their height as well. So it's really interesting how that happens sometimes. But determining a most valuable player from this show, there were some obvious ones to go with. I think Shane McMahon's performance in the Euro title match is worthy of praise. I think Triple H and Chyna deserve credit for the heel turn that happened, where it looked like Chyna had already turned heel and joined the corporation, and it looked like she had joined back with DX, but then it turned out to be like a double swerve where, no, Triple H had joined back with Chyna and joined her in the corporation. So that was probably one of the most dramatically interesting things to happen on the entire show. And obviously a huge career move for Triple H. And then you had Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin in the main event, their first of 3 WrestleMania matches. I thought they had a great match, very exciting, chaotic as hell, very fun match. But, and this might surprise people, I'm going to give most valuable player for WrestleMania 15 to Mick Foley, Mankind, as he was known at this time. He was playing the Mankind persona. And the reason I'm giving it to Mick is because not only did Mick have a match on the show with Big Show, which was actually one of the better matches on the show, the winner of that match would go on to be the referee of the main event. And I thought that was a neat way to kind of get Mick Foley into the main event without making him a wrestler in the main event, because Foley was so popular at that point that, you know, he deserved to be a fixture in the main event storylines, but you couldn't really add him to Austin and Rock, because Rock was the big villain, and as over as Foley was, Austin was like on another level. So that, I thought that was a nice way to get Foley into the main event, and it looked like Big Show injured him during their match, and Foley wasn't going to be able to make it to the main event. So when you get to that point in the main event where Austin and Rock are fighting each other, the referees have been knocked out, and then Mick Foley, holding his ribs, just stumbles out there and gets to play the role of referee in the main event like he wanted. That was a night, for me personally, especially watching it back then, that was my big pop, like, fuck yeah moment when it happened. When Foley walked out there, I thought it was a very satisfying moment for Mick, and for me personally, the highlight of the main event. The main event, that was by far the best part of the show. There wasn't a whole lot of, I mean, really, I kind of talked about it here. There was the Rock and Austin match, there was the Foley Big Show match, which was really like a storyline point to build into the main event. And then you had the Triple H heel turn and the European title match, which contained the Triple H heel turn. And those were really the only good things about WrestleMania 15. Everything else was utter garbage, which gave me a bit of a treasure trove to deal with when picking out a least valuable player. I could have gone for the women's match between Sable and Tori, which was terrible and featured the WWE debut of Nicole Bass. her one and only WrestleMania appearance. I could have gone with virtually anybody in the Intercontinental and Hardcore title matches, because those matches were fucked to holy hell. I could have gone with the Big Boss Man and the Undertaker for stinking up the joint in the Hell in a Cell match, which was, I think, personally the worst match of Undertaker's career, which is saying a lot. Because he's had some stinkers. And, you know, I'm not trying to put Taker down. I know I have put Taker down quite a bit on this channel, but I'm not trying to put him down in this case when I say that he's had a lot of bad matches. He's been around for so goddamn long that, yes, he's going to have a lot of stinkers under his belt just by sheer volume of content that he's produced over his career. But I'm not going to give it to either one of them. I'm going to give least valuable player to the poor, unfortunate soul that is Bart Gunn, who won the Brawl for All tournament, which is one of the dumbest ideas that the WWE has ever had, because it makes no sense and it's dangerous for the boys. And for those of you who don't know what the Brawl for All was, first of all, go listen to Jim Cornette's assessment of it. I'm pretty sure he'll explain it way better than I ever could. And the whole idea was to have the boys that participated in this tournament have actual shoot fights and the actual winners advancing through the tournament, and it was designed to get Dr. Death over because they just assumed that Dr. Death Steve Williams would just maul everybody and just make it to the finals. And it's like, that is so goddamn stupid, because in a shoot, anything can happen. You can't guarantee that somebody's just going to maul everybody and win the damn thing. It's so stupid. And ultimately, it was Bart Gunn who ended up winning the tournament, legitimately. And some people have interpreted what they did with at WrestleMania 15 as a punishment to Bart for ruining their plans for Dr. Death, even though, I mean, motherfucker, just make it a work. Like, if you wanted Dr. Death to go over, just make it a work like it's supposed to be. Because really, that's what made the Brawl for All stupid, was the fact that it was a shoot instead of a work. Like, dude, if you just made it a work, it probably would have been okay, but you probably would have had to tweak it a little bit, but for the most part, it's like, come on, make it a work. This is supposed to be a work. So Bart Gunn seemingly gets punished for doing what he was told to do in the first place, and gets put into a match with a legitimate boxer in Butterbean, and Butterbean proceeds to humiliate him and beat him in 30 seconds with that memorable knockout shot that just dropped Bart Gunn to the floor. Yeah, it wasn't good. It wasn't good for Bart. It wasn't good for the WWE. It wasn't good for anybody. It was just an unfortunate thing that happened. The nicest thing I can say about the whole thing is that, well, at least the highlight's cool. I mean, it is a highlight moment where Bart Gunn gets knocked out. It's just a shame that everything else surrounding it and why it happened and the reasoning behind doing it. It was just an ill-advised idea, and I felt bad for Bart because he didn't deserve to be put in that situation. But he gets least valuable player awards, unfortunately, through no fault of his own, unfortunately. Now we move on to one of my personal favorite WrestleManias, one that I hold in very high esteem, WrestleMania 19. And if you want to pick an MVP for this show, there are a lot of different ways you could go. You could go with Chris Jericho, who had his best WrestleMania match up to this point. I would still say it's his best WrestleMania match that he's ever had, with a stellar performance against Shawn Michaels. I could give it to Shawn Michaels, who made his WrestleMania return and looked very, very good. Shawn, at this point, he had the stellar performance with Triple H at SummerSlam 2002, which was his return match the year before, and that was great. But then after that, Shawn kind of had a little bit of trouble getting back to the old Shawn Michaels. Like, the work he was doing after the SummerSlam match didn't quite live up to what we would expect out of Shawn Michaels. Because if it were, let me put it this way, the work he was doing after SummerSlam, or more specifically from Survivor Series to WrestleMania, in between, where Shawn, because he took a while off after SummerSlam to sell the injury against Triple H, if that was the quality of work that he had delivered at SummerSlam and beyond, everybody would have been okay with it because nobody had high expectations for Shawn when he came back. But for him to have this amazing match at SummerSlam against Triple H, and then to kind of have these okay matches here and there after his return at Survivor Series, it was kind of like, okay, where's that old Shawn Michaels magic? We know it's there. We saw it at SummerSlam. And I felt like this match kind of brought back the old Shawn Michaels magic, and it took Jericho to kind of get it out of him on a permanent basis. And I think the feud and the conflict and everything was just so good that it was just there was no way it couldn't work. So I could give it to either one of them. I could give it to Vince McMahon, who has that memorable shot in his street fight against Hulk Hogan where he peers up over the side of the ring and he's got blood all over his face and he looks like Satan. Probably the best image ever associated with the Mr. McMahon character. And his performance, I personally think the WrestleMania 19 match is Vince's best performance. From everything he did, from like doing the leg drop off the ladder where he does that mocking, you know, to the crowd, and I thought Vince was absolutely stellar in this match. I mean, he was stellar in the 17 match against Shane too, but this one was just on a whole other level, I thought. And I could give it to Hulk Hogan, who had a stellar match with Vince McMahon, a match that nobody expected to be stellar, and it was. Absolutely incredible match. Other MVPs, I could give it to The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin, who had their final WrestleMania match against each other. Austin's final match at all. Like, it was the last match of his career, so it was his send-off, his swan song. And, you know, I thought they both tore the house down and gave Steve that nice send-off. A match that we didn't know was his send-off at the time. And The Rock, you know, The Rock and Austin just had such magical chemistry that giving either one of them the MVP for WrestleMania 19 would work. But, and this may surprise you knowing my feelings on the main event of this show, I'm going to give WrestleMania 19 MVP to the Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle. Now, why would I give it to Kurt Angle even though I feel the match with Lesnar is overrated? I feel it's an overrated match, and my opinion on that has not changed. However, when you look at the circumstances around Kurt Angle being at this show, he required neck surgery. And I distinctly remember I argued with myself, even though I thought the card on paper was amazing, I argued with myself about whether or not I was going to watch WrestleMania 19 live because I was so scared that Angle was going to get paralyzed and that something bad was going to happen to Kurt. I was like, I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it if it happens. I was just scared to death that something was going to happen to Kurt. By all rights, he had no business being in the ring that night if you require neck surgery, and the fact that he went out there and performed the way he did, and looked like he performed like Kurt Angle, I'm not going to say, even though the match didn't fully work for me, it's like, I'm not going to attribute that to a lack of effort, especially on Kurt's part. He was still Kurt Angle. I mean, that deserves, and more guts than brains is the best way to sum it up, but I mean, you can't take away from how hard Kurt Angle has worked, and I've said it a million times before, I would never say that Kurt is my favorite worker in the history of the business. I will say, what I will say is that he's probably the hardest worker in the history of the business, and WrestleMania 19 is just a prime example of that, and the real icing on the cake that really made me give MVP award to Kurt Angle was the finish, where we all know what happened. Brock Lesnar goes for a shooting star press, Angle was too far away, Lesnar comes crashing down on his head, knocks himself out basically, gives himself a concussion. Angle is basically at that point, you know, the finish has been botched, and now he's got an opponent that's not there. His dance partner is just not even on this planet Earth right now. He's concussed or whatever, so Angle has to be able to pull the finish out of his ass and get them to go home, which he did, better than any other person would have been capable of doing. The fact that he was able to just call this on the fly, it's like, look, just give me another F5 or whatever. We'll find a way out of this. Again, commendable on Kurt's part, and he basically, in that one move, he basically pulled the match out of being a disaster. Like, because that could have been a disaster, and I think Kurt Angle having to be the ring general in that situation and elevating that situation and making it better than it was, better than what it could have been. I think Kurt deserves a lot of credit for that, and that was really the topper that decided where I decided to give him the MVP of WrestleMania 19. And I think Kurt deserves all the credit in the world for what he did that night. Again, even though I feel the match is overrated, I'm not going to take away Kurt's effort and what he pulled off that night, because that was just damn near superhuman. And the fact that he went into shock after the show was over is no surprise to me. Just glad that he got out of it okay. And, you know, but we're getting Kurt Angle's WrestleMania return this year. We'll see how that goes. But, yeah, I wanted to really praise Kurt Angle for this because even though that's not one of my favorite matches, I gained a ton of respect for Kurt after it was over. So, now, least valuable player, there are only two that I would even consider giving least valuable player to. The runner-up are the Miller Lite Catfight Girls, who, as I've said in the past, are easily the worst celebrity guests that the WWE has ever wasted their time on. It's just, I remember when they first signed them, and I was like, wow, we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel here for celebrity guests. I mean, my God, I mean, at least, and I made fun of it, at least, Susan St. James and Elvira, as bad as they were at the booth, at least like Elvira was a known commodity in 1986, so it made sense to get her. Susan St. James, she was married to Dick Ebersol, and there was a working relationship there, so it made sense. This was just like, were the Miller Lite Catfight girls even that big of a deal? I don't remember the commercials being like that significant. Maybe it's just me, I don't know, but I don't remember like being that into the commercials, or a lot of other people being that into the commercials. And it seemed beneath WrestleMania to have them there. Like, it felt like more of an advertisement for them than it was to bring eyeballs to WrestleMania. Like, I mean, who the fuck cares? I don't even know their names. I didn't even bother to look up their names when I started doing the series. But as bad as they were, and as bad as that pillow fight segment was, I decided to give the least valuable player to the Colossus of Bago Road, Nathan Jones. Now, you look at Nathan Jones, and he's a guy that's got the look. That guy has the look that you want a wrestling star to look at, especially if you're looking for a monster heel. The vignette promo packages hyping his debut were amazing. And I was like, they've got like a great character waiting to explode here. Like, this guy, if this guy can work, oh my God, we've got a huge star here. Unfortunately, he couldn't work worth a lick, and he was green as goose shit, and was absolutely terrible. And he was so bad was Nathan Jones, that the planned WrestleMania match of Undertaker and Nathan Jones versus Big Show and A-Train, a tag team match, by the way, where Undertaker can do most of the work. Nathan Jones, they could not trust him not to fuck this match up, and he was so terrible that they decided to take him out of the match and make it a handicap match, and then reduce Nathan Jones to doing a run-in during the match and hitting basically 2 moves. And that's it. It's like, wow, you are so terrible they can't even trust you with a tag match where a veteran can do most of the work. How awful are you? But he did much better in movies. I liked his role in Mad Max Fury Road. I had a baby brother! He was perfect in every way! But, yeah, Nathan Jones, least valuable player of WrestleMania 19. And we're going to close things up with WrestleMania 24. A very emotional WrestleMania for a lot of people because it saw the retirement of Ric Flair, which was the emotional climax of the whole evening and the emotional high point. And I could easily give MVP to Ric Flair. Unfortunately, his performance in that match left a lot to be desired. It was, I've said before, it's like Ric Flair looked his age in that match and then some. And I'm not unhappy that he finally got his send off here. He finally retired because it was time. Other good things that happened on the show. As me personally being a fan of Edge, it was just awesome that he got the main event spot that he deserved. He should have been there 2 years earlier. But it was like, yes, Edge deserves a main event spot. And somebody texted me. I will look up who that is later. Edge deserved that main event spot. And it got to a point where he was so good they couldn't ignore it anymore. And even though he was just there to put Taker over, basically, I was just happy that Edge got the main event spot because he deserved it. Absolutely. And I also thought that John Morrison and CM Punk deserve a lot of credit for their performances in the Money in the Bank ladder match. The Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania 24, I feel, is one of the better Money in the Bank ladder matches, and I thought Punk and Morrison in particular shined in that match. And I'm a fan of both guys' work, so I just wanted to call attention to that. And as a sidebar, I kind of want to give JBL like a runner-up MVP just for throwing a trash can in Hornswoggle's face. that made me happy. But I'm going to give the MVP to Ric Flair's opponent, Shawn Michaels, who had to carry Flair, make the match work, and really gave the match the emotion that it needed. And I think a lot of people remember that moment where he goes to super kick Flair, and right before he does it, you get that close-up on his face. I'm sorry. I love you. Boom. Super kick 1, 2, 3. And it was one of those great emotional, dramatic moments in wrestling that a worker like Shawn Michaels could pull off. And I thought his performance in the match was stellar. I don't know if anyone else could have got that match out of Rick at that point in Rick's career. I know I sound like I'm putting down Flair, but he was at that point where I was like, okay, dude, it's time to think about retiring. And I love Flair. I mean, if you watch my Clash of Champions live streams, I've enjoyed pretty much everything Flair has done on the Clash streams, but yeah, I think Shawn Michaels deserves most of the credit for making that match work as well as it did, and giving WrestleMania 24 its main emotional highlights. So that's my take on that matter. So I'm going to give MVP to Mr. WrestleMania himself, Shawn Michaels. And who's going to get least valuable player? I could give it to Kane and Chavo Guerrero for their completely pointless ECW title match. It's like the match was so pointless that they used a battle royal on the pre-show to set it up, and then the match lasted 30 seconds. It's like, wow, they really don't give a shit about their ECW title, do they? I could give it to Batista, who had a surprisingly lackluster performance against Umaga. I thought Umaga and Batista could have a good match together, like a good power match. And Batista, I don't know, he was just off that night. And it just wasn't his strongest performance, and Umaga looked like he was doing most of the work. Like, if you look at the finish of that match, it looked like Umaga basically Batista bombed himself, which looked really strange. But I'm not going to give least valuable player to them. I am going to give it to their celebrity guest, Snoop Dogg, who was the master of ceremonies during the Bunny Mania match. The match that was so bad that God struck it down by turning the lights out in the arena while the match was in process. It was dull, it was boring, nobody cared. And I just have to ask this about Snoop Dogg. Like, what is his appeal? Can anyone explain that to me? And maybe, is it... I don't know, like, because I feel like I've always been out of touch with my own generation, and my generation fucking loves Snoop Dogg, and I'm like, why? He's just some skinny weirdo that's smokes weed and just says izzle dizzle bizzle, and just adds a bunch of, like, nonsense words together, and pretends to be a good rapper. Like, I don't see the appeal in Snoop Dogg, and I never have, and especially by this point, I was like, why is Snoop Dogg still a thing? And that was 10 years ago. And I'm still asking that question. Why is Snoop Dogg still a thing? Isn't he a relic by now? Isn't he like the relic of a bygone era and nobody takes him seriously anymore? I feel like that's the way it should be. But yeah, that was a perfect example of using a celebrity guest with no benefits, because nobody got any kind of a rub from Snoop Dogg. His appearance didn't generate any interest, and what they did with him wasn't any good. So it was just pointless all around. So terrible, terrible, terrible. But yeah, that concludes part 10 of my WrestleMania MVP LVP series. Stay tuned. Next week, we're going to close out the series with part 11, as I also do my WrestleMania weekend preview and predictions, which will preview and predict all of the matches from all of the shows that will be taking place during all of the shows I will be watching during WrestleMania weekend. But that is all I have for you now. Y'all have a happy Easter. We've got Easter coming up in just a couple hours, actually. But that is all I have for you now. Y'all stay tuned to the channel. I've got a lot more coming out for you.